All right, dudes, welcome back. Let's hit chapter 7 together. So we finished chapter 6 with a lot of doubt. Mrs. Van Hopper was like, yo, you can't do this. You're not going to be good living with De Winter Manderley. You're too young. But you know what? He told me himself he just can't live there alone. And that's why he chose you. So we left the chapter with lots of doubt and a lack of trust in our narrator on the part of Mrs. Van Hopper. This is hopefully the last time we'll ever see her. I think we can all agree she was a pretty disgusting character that we didn't really have any true feelings for. I don't think anyone's really saying, oh, I loved Van Hopper's character. She was so nice. So we move into chapter 7, and here we see the trip to Manderley. We see them arriving at Manderley. They actually, Du Maurier didn't really include a lot of the weeks leading up to Manderley, but apparently they were some pretty good weeks. They were driving through Italy and France, going back to England, and there were lots of moments to be happy about. Max seemed happy, and she said he was much gayer then, which suggests that maybe he won't be as happy and gay as he was once he gets to Manderley. But we see this arrival at Manderley, and we know that the narrator is feeling very nervous about it. And I think that's understandable. I don't think that that's too far out of the ordinary. This is a new lease on life. This is a new husband, a new house. There are new people that live at the house, servants, friends, acquaintances that she's going to have to integrate with. And I would be nervous in that situation. I would be nervous moving anywhere, right? So this wasn't out of the ordinary that she was nervous about arriving to Manderley. And then they get there, and as they're pulling in, Max is like, "You only need to be yourself, and they'll adore you. They'll love you. Just be yourself. Be the young, youthful, innocent girl that you are," which makes me as a reader think, okay, if this is what he wants, maybe Rebecca was different in this. Maybe she wasn't young, youthful, innocent. And maybe this is sound advice that Max de Winter is giving the narrator. I think the real question is the narrator going to take this advice and just be who she is? And I think the answer to that is a pretty easy no. She doesn't like the fact that she's awkward. She doesn't like the fact that she's young. All she does is talk about how she wishes she was older and she wishes she was less awkward. So I don't think she's going to just suddenly embrace the person that she is. There's always this desire to be someone else, and we're going to see that theme kind of develop throughout the book here. So there's a lot of imagery in this chapter. There are a couple images I really want to focus on. I've used the AI tool to craft a few images, and I think these images contribute to the Gothic feel of the book. I think they really match the Gothic ideas that Du Maurier presents in the novel, and I think the biggest, I'll read a passage from their arrival at Manderley. We see they're pulling in and they see the red rhododendrons. And it says, "Suddenly I saw a clearing in the dark drive ahead and a patch of sky, and in a moment the dark trees had thinned, the nameless shrubs had disappeared, and on either side of us was a wall of color, blood red, reaching far above our heads. We were amongst the rhododendrons. There was something bewildering, even shocking about the suddenness of their discovery. The woods had not prepared me for them. They startled me with their crimson faces, massed one upon the other in incredible profusion, showing no leaf, no twig, nothing but the slaughterous red, luscious and fantastic, unlike any rhododendron plant I'd seen before. And then a little bit later, this is on page 70, by the way, a little bit later, we see, and these were monsters rearing to the sky, massed like a battalion, too powerful. They were not plants at all. So that's one of the first images. They're pulling in, they're driving to the house. They don't even see the house yet. They just see this giant red flower monster. And we have to think, this has to be symbolic. There has to be some symbolism here. These red, overpowering monster plants, they should represent something, right? And we're not exactly sure what they are, but it adds a Gothic feel to this. And we talked a little bit about how in Gothic literature, pictures, portraits on the wall were a really big Gothic convention because they suggest a history of something there. And I think without giving the symbolism away, I think that that's a good way to look at it, is kind of comparing them to the idea of portraits. Like these flowers are there kind of haunting the grounds, welcoming our narrator, and there has to be some kind of history with them. Maybe these flowers were somebody else's, or maybe somebody else picked these flowers once or liked them, but they really stick out to the narrator, and she notices it, and it's very intimidating. It's an intimidating welcome for her, just this red flower monster. So I created an image of it, and here it is. And just take a look at it, and it's not perfect, but hopefully it'll stick in your mind as a powerful image in this chapter. So they finally get to Manderley. It seems like they drove for a long time through the woods to get to the house. And when they finally got there, there was a whole bunch of people waiting for them. They were all of the servants and the maids of the house. They were there to welcome Mr. De Winter and the new Mrs. De Winter. And Max was a little upset. He's like, "Oh, they shouldn't have done this. I told them not to." I think that it would have happened no matter what. That's just kind of common courtesy. When your master arrives home, you welcome them at the door. But of course, this makes the narrator very nervous, flustered, panicked. She has to now have some interactions with other people. And we know that her interactions with other people aren't going to be the best because we know how awkward she is. So I think the most important character that we meet through all of this is Mrs. Danvers. We also meet somebody named Frith. Both of them are servants in the household, and Frith seems like a pretty normal, decent human being, but there's something about Danvers that we are immediately not attracted to. It could be the dead hand. It could be the skull-like face, the cold look in her eyes, the fact that she never smiles. She is very scary, and I've created an image here of what could be Mrs. Danvers. And I think what I just want you to see is there's nothing haunting in this book. There's nothing crazy going on that suggests ghosts and spirits and monsters, but the way it's written makes us as readers picture these characters as these weird things, as these scary, daunting figures. So Danvers is very, very scary. And I think that goes without saying. If you probably should have felt that. If you didn't, maybe you should reread the chapter. So we're basically getting an introduction to the house. I think some significant things within the house were the fact that they're not sleeping. They're not going to be sleeping or using the bedroom that Max used while Rebecca was alive. They've actually prepared a new room that they will be using for their dwelling where they're going to be sleeping. And I think you can take a couple of things from that. You could either say this was very courteous of Max De Winter. It was, his wife died. He doesn't want to sleep in the same room that he slept with his former wife in. And, this was a nice gesture to do this. You could also say that, maybe the narrator feels that she isn't good enough for the big, nice, beautiful bedroom that overlooks the sea. There's definitely a conflict happening between these two ideas, and I think we need to be cognizant of that. I don't think Max meant anything ill by it, and I think the narrator may be reading a little too much into it. But Danvers isn't doing anything to help that, because they go into the new room and Danvers undersells it. She's like, oh, yeah, the other room's so much better. It's nicer. You can hear this. This is where Mrs. De Winter slept. And obviously, this is having the narrator get more inside of herself, start thinking that she's inferior. I think there is definitely an inferiority complex that our narrator has, and it's a theme that is really developing. She doesn't feel like she is enough. Maybe she feels that Max's former wife was enough. And Danvers, again, is not doing anything to help that. And Danvers is such an interesting character because we're also meeting a new character. We're starting to see the development of Rebecca, and that it really is beginning in this chapter. We're starting to learn who Rebecca was, some things about her, and we're getting all of that information through Miss Danvers. Miss Danvers is the one who is saying, oh, well, Rebecca was independent. She didn't really use a lot of my help. She liked to call the shots around the house. And this is much different than what the narrator said. The narrator's like, oh, I think you should just run the house the way it's always been. And she's like, oh, I didn't really run the house. Mrs. De Winter did all of that. So we're learning things about De Winter through Danvers. And I think we're very quickly understanding that we're not going to learn a lot about Rebecca through Max De Winter. There was an interesting exchange on page... was it 70? 82, sorry, 82. There was an exchange where Max almost said something about Rebecca, but then there was an ellipses or 3 periods, and he stopped, and he was like, moved on. So this is something I caught on the second reading. I wouldn't expect you guys to catch that on the first reading, but now that I've read this, I went back, I was like, oh, that's actually something really important on 82. The fact that Max is restraining himself from giving us any information or development on the character. And we have to rely on Danvers to get all of the information from the character, which we obviously know is going to be very biased. It's very clear that Danvers loved Mrs. De Winter. And that was evidenced with the color coming back into her face, her voice becoming animated when she started talking about Mrs. De Winter. Every other time she was dead. She looked dead and white, and she kind of became alive when she talked about Mrs. De Winter. So the last thing about Danvers is her language, I think, is important. I noticed a trend in her speech that she doesn't ever make it known that she wants to do anything for our narrator. And she makes it a point to say, oh, I have to do this. I'm just following Mr. De Winter's orders. I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do. There's never a time where she's like, oh, yes, like I wanted to do this for you, or I've done this for you, to make her feel comfortable or welcome. And this has to feel extremely, extremely unwelcoming for our narrator. And I think we can understand why she feels very uncomfortable with this. Danvers is a scary, scary, scary woman. So we start to feel a little bit of settling in. The chapter ends with them sitting in the... I'm just trying to see if there's anything I'm missing here. No, I think we're good. So the chapter ends with them sitting in what would you call the family room. There's like a fireplace and a bunch of chairs, and it's pretty clear that This is a routine that Mr. De Winter has. After dinner, he likes to go sit on the couches and read a book by the fire, and the dog comes in, and the narrator was doing that, was starting to feel kind of comfortable. I was like, oh, like, this is nice. This is what we do after dinner. But then, of course, we see Rebecca start to creep in. The narrator starts to become obsessed about how Rebecca must have sat on this couch and her arm must have been where the narrator's arm was, and the dog is resting on her lap because at some point the dog used to rest his head on Rebecca's lap. And so we see that jealousy. And I think we're seeing a pattern with these chapters. We're seeing this slow, gradual build up for some suspense and some jealousy at the end of the chapter. So when you start to read these long chapters, and maybe you're thinking they're boring, that's the point. Is Du Maurier is trying to lull us a little bit, and this helps to build tension. We know that the jealousy is coming, right? And so the more Du Maurier waits, and the more she spreads out, a sense of normality, the more it hits us at the end of the chapter, like, ooh, that was juicy. This is something called the bomb theory. There's a director named Alfred Hitchcock. He actually directed the Rebecca movie. But he has a theory called the bomb theory, and he says, if you're going to have a bomb in a story, don't say that the bomb's going to explode right before it explodes. Put the bomb on the table in the first scene of the movie or in the first chapter, and then ignore it for a while, and the audience is going to think about when that bomb is going to explode, and that's how you build tension. And I feel like Daphne du Maurier does that throughout the chapters. We know that there's going to be some pang of jealousy that's coming, right? And the more we have to wait for it, the more tension is building. So hopefully you're starting to appreciate that tension and the rising of it. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to send us a message, and I would be happy to answer any questions, and so would your teachers. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you for chapter 8.